Welcome, friends and comrades, to another broadcast by Noah Khrachvik and myself. This show we're calling The Carpenter and the Professor. It's hosted, of course,
The
by the
professor and the carpenter.
No, we got to go alphabetically. It's hosted, of course, by the Midwestern Marx Institute for Marxist Theory and Political Analysis, the People's Institute, as some call it. Today, we're going to be discussing Noah's recent conversation with Middle MAGA. We'll touch on themes on how to talk to our neighbors and our coworkers who have similar ideological backgrounds. We'll also, of course, discuss the election of Milei in Argentina. What are its implications, not just for Argentina, but geopolitically? Noah also had recently an interview on RT on the subject, so we'll discuss how that went and have him flesh out some of the things that he spoke about. We'll also look at all recent stories concerning Palestine, not just the crimes of empire and the hypocrisy of our leaders, but also the various forms of resistance that we've seen. We'll celebrate Biden's birthday yesterday, which took place yesterday, by looking at his top 5 crimes. And then we'll finish off by reading a quote from Parenti from Inventing Reality, where he talks about media manipulation, which I think is extremely pertinent to our age of genocide, really, and how it is that it's being legitimized and whitewashed by the mainstream media. And we'll talk about that in conjunction with the Marxist view on ideology. We'll get started right after this. Alrighty, folks, that's the Beautiful International. There to wake you up, to wake up the spirits, for Noah to wake him up physically, because this is past his bedtime. But how you doing, brother?
Good. If there's one thing that will keep me awake, it's being here for y'all. So happy to be doing this, brother. Long day, but a good day, a very good one. So yeah, I know we've been starting these Professor and the Carpenter shows by talking about what we're currently reading. So what are you currently reading, Carlos?
Oh my God, dude, I've been literally like an addict in this area. I'm reading like 20 different things. I signed up for this app called Speechify, which makes reading tremendously easier. And one of the problems I usually get, because I do a whole lot of reading, is that I end up getting my eyes hurt by the end of the day, and I end up having like a slight headache from all the reading. That's all gone with Speechify, because it's like reading it to you, and especially for the things that are not directly related to what you're researching and writing about, it's so good. And I've been just blowing through books and, JSTOR articles and, peer-reviewed stuff. And yes, I was telling you yesterday, I actually went to sleep accidentally at like 5 a.m. because I laid in bed at like 1 and I went on my phone and I was like, let me just open up Speechify. And one thing led to another. Next thing you know, I checked my phone, or I checked the time on my phone, and it's like 4:57. I'm like, oh my God. I haven't stopped reading for 4 hours. So primarily the topics that I'm rereading Inventing Reality. We've been discussing perhaps doing a class on parenti at some point, which is interesting because someone here mentioned that we should do a parenti conference. That sounds phenomenal. I know most of the groups that we collaborate with, folks like RBN and others, they love parenti as well. So it might be cool to do a parenti conference, definitely. Um, but we've been thinking about doing a class on Michael Parenti, perhaps led by Eddie, who's been the one that has been really focusing on Parenti books as the centerpiece of his research. So I've been going back, reading some of the stuff that I had started with originally. But my research primarily right now is on it's kind of specific, but it's on the origins of philosophy in Miletus and the role that all these various factors play in developing philosophy, one of which is the developments of certain technological apparatuses and the role of the architects. Here I'm working with a scholar from my school, actually, called Robert Hahn, who's done some cutting edge work in that area. Also looking at the role of coinage and money, which gets basically invented in a semi-modern form in Miletus, and here the work of Seaford on ancient Greek philosophy and the development of money has been pivotal, and then other classicists as well, so that I can make the thesis rooted in historical materialism that it's these great social transformations that are rooted specifically in the economic base of society, and then end up taking various shapes in the political, juridical superstructure that eventually lead to these great transformations in thought, and that the birth of philosophy is one of the archetypical examples of one of these key transitions in material social life that reflects itself in a big ideological break from the mythological tradition into the tradition of logos, the tradition of philosophy. And we see this again and again. You know, you can't have Descartes and the turn inward in order to find, you know, what is clear and distinct without the collapse of the feudal institutions, the delegitimation of the church, you know, the discoveries by Galileo that bring a lot of the church dogmas down. You can't have Kant without the expansion of capitalism, that cosmopolitan bourgeois turn. You can't have it without a certain development of capital. You can't have Marx without the development of capitalism to a specific stage. You can't have the irrationalist philosophies of Nietzsche and Schopenhauer without the very clear turn of the bourgeoisie away from being a progressive class into being a reactionary one right around the era of the 1848 revolutions and a little bit before in some places. So that's sort of the thesis that I'm working with to conclude that we are in this similar period of crisis where the world is entering into a post-Columbian, post-1492 era. And the question that we have to bring up is what form of new epoch-breaking or epoch-making thoughts and philosophies will arise. And the thesis I'm planning on postulating is that Marxism continues to be the philosophy of the present, not the Marxism that goes back and looks at Marx and Engels and just copies and pastes whatever they concluded, but the Marxism that's actually Marxism, that's faithful to the materialist dialectic, that evolves, that develops, and that is creative. That is the only form of thought that today can help us understand the world and help us change it towards, producing a world that's radically freer, and where human beings can live flourishing lives in community and in harmony with nature.
Only Carlos or me could take a question like, what are you currently reading? Take it through falling asleep, into the birth of philosophy, into the application of Marxism to the modern day while criticizing all the fakes. So amazing. Speaking of both that application of Marxism to the modern day and falling asleep, I want to show you guys something that our friend Future Homestead mentioned to us real quick. If I could share my screen here. That's me working on the reproletarianization paper this morning, and just not loving life after I woke up. I fell asleep and my face just went right onto the keyboard. Right
We
on.
should leave the RFF, all the random keys that you fell asleep on. We should leave that in the middle of a pamphlet as an inside joke.
There's like 9 pages of it.
The pamphlet is 425 pages, 376 of which is just forehead typing.
My face. Yeah. But yeah, so that was a fun way to wake up. But yeah, I'm reading the same 2 books that are back there. If y'all want to see them. King's books, collection of all of his writing and speeches, which is fascinating. The man was absolutely brilliant theorist and Hegelian. And The Cultural Cold War by Francis Stoner Saunders, which is really, really good and gets at the origins of the fake left and the falsifiers of Marxism and how that false view is proliferated throughout our society today. I actually recently just like an hour ago ended a conversation with a very clever guy, a very smart guy named Osiris, who runs a show called Middle MAGA. And that was a big topic, separating that fake stuff from what we actually are, how we actually think, and what we've actually done in the real world. So yeah. Oh, thank you so much, ReZero Cult Leader. Says that the discussion was incredible and loved to see stuff like that. I hope to have more conversations with him in the future, and would really love to turn that sort of thing into a regular show. Sort of, Marxism meets MAGA, like left meets right, come together and talk about the things that actually matter from different perspectives and see where people agree, where they disagree for real, rather than just the cartoons we see on the internet all day.
Yeah, that's so important. And, one of the things that our institute has always emphasized, which is nothing new, it's not us being these creative geniuses, it's just Marxism, which is that, like, the focus that we should have in organizing should not be, like, on the basis of ideology. If you're building, like, a party, which is not what, like, the institute is doing, the institute, it's an educational institute, but if your aim is to, like, build a party, then sure, you should have a higher ideological standard for, like, the people that come in. But if your goal is this broader goal, which is interconnected to the other one, but this broader goal of organizing working people, ideology has to get tossed aside. You have to be flexible. You have to focus in on, like, the class positions that should be the primary. What class are the people that I'm speaking to in, and the acknowledgement that every person that is not in this class that benefits from finance capital, the monopoly capitalist, can be radicalized. If you are aware of, where they're at and are flexible enough to start conversations that begin in different starting points, but that ultimately take them to where they should go, according to their objective interest, which is socialism. It's very easy. I don't care if you're, part of the proletariat, a small business owner, a worker in a cooperative, all these different forms of property that or class positions that find themselves antagonized with the dominant form of capital today, this big finance, big monopoly capital. And what we need is, as you suggested, and what the party used to suggest back with Foster and Winston, is an anti-monopoly coalition, which is another way of saying a coalition of the people, of the popular classes. We need to do something akin to what Mao did, and we've done it in the past. Certain CPUSA party programs and training manuals have done it in the past. But we need to do something akin to what the Chinese revolutionaries did over there, which is, an analysis of who the Friends of the People are, who are the people, this broader concept that's like a meta class concept. Like, which classes are going to be the progressive classes? Which ones are for sure going to be the centerpiece? Obviously, the proletariat and reproletariat. And which ones are going to vacillate, but we can bring over, right? The petty bourgeoisie and other, parts of the middle class and all these different class positions. So we need something like that. And in order to succeed in organizing this class or this meta class of the people, we need to be flexible in terms of where people are at, meet them where they're at, and then regardless of starting point, get to where you need to go.
Yeah, 100%. And here's how you can tell the difference between a Marxist and a liberal in a red mask. Are they recognizing the need for us to think about things in terms of class, or are they trying to organize the left against the right? Right? For Marxism, we view what the left and right are materially, not as choices people make on what to support or believe and not believe. The language does not lead. The material reality leads, right? And so when you get these sort of right opportunists trying to sneak their way into our organizations, or even if they're dominant within an organization, if they're telling you that you need to be organizing the left, which means generally a bunch of liberal anarchists who have far more in common with Millet than any of us, there's an issue there, right? And what we need to be doing, I mean, we say this all the time, is learning Marxism so we can tell the difference between those things, right? So we can understand what class even is.
Absolutely, and that's evident to anyone who's done, any bit of work on the ground. This is something that we always bring up, because there's something about election season in the U.S. People are so rooted in the idea that politics is elections, that everything intensifies and everything heightens during the election period. But when we were working for the Bernie Sanders campaign, it became very evident to us that one of the central contradictions between the sort of rank and file of the campaign, the people knocking the doors, and the campaign managers and leaders, and perhaps Bernie himself, was that they wanted us to go knock on the doors of former Democrats, people who voted for the Democratic Party, because the idea was, well, Bernie's running as a Democrat; these are the people that we have to appeal to ideologically. And there's this contradiction at play, because it was the movement was being phrased as a political revolution. A lot of us younger folks had just started reading Marx, and we're like, what? Socialists like Bernie claims to be organized on the basis of class, but they're sending me to these high-end middle-class neighborhoods of lawyers and professors that have been teaching for 30 years and are making well into the six-figure salaries, who don't care about any of the more basic policies that would benefit working people that Bernie was pushing for. And it became very evident to us that there's this contradiction at play, and that the way to resolve it, if you're actually interested in building a revolutionary movement, is not by organizing on the basis of ideology or who's liberal and who's a little bit more liberal or more radical, but it's on the basis of showing up to the poor neighborhoods, to working class neighborhoods. We would go to the trailer homes and the trailer parks and talk to people. We'd go to the stores and the communities that were in the poorer parts of the neighborhoods, and just talk to people within the stores. And we were infinitely more successful in those areas, which were primarily Trump, than we were in the middle class liberal neighborhoods. So it's been evident for us, for me and Eddie, who worked there, and for all of our colleagues from back in the day, that this was something that the left, the institutional democratic socialist left, was completely missing. And it's not just an insight that we've developed. Our friends from Class Unity, they've known this. They tried to reform the thinking of the democratic socialists. They failed, and now they're doing their own thing. But it's very clear: organize on the basis of class, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and this is something I wanted to bring up in my conversation with his name's Osiris. is the left, as he sees it, right, is this middle class liberal thing. If you go to working class neighborhoods, if you go to the ghetto and the trailer park, you're finding two types of people. You're finding people who don't want anything to do about politics, either because they ain't got the time or energy to care about it, or they're Trump people. I mean, that's it. There were some Bernie people, but after Bernie basically sold them out, they're going. Those people are kind of gone. And so if we're looking at things based in class, the appeal to this left is necessarily an appeal to the middle class. And Lenin teaches us everything we need to know about these folks who stand in the middle. That yes, sometimes they can come with us, but they vacillate. They will do what's in their interest. There's a reason they're not with us. You know what I mean? And they often align very closely with finance because they're comfortable. They own property, right? And it becomes a sort of moral grandstanding for them. Who can appear the most woke is very in for middle-class liberals right now. Why? Because they ain't worried about where the next rent payment is coming from. What they are worried about is looking like they care about the downtrodden. That's very hip for them. And so everything that the media shows to them and shows them as the downtrodden, they care about for that month that they're in the media, right? They were all caring about bathroom bills when the trans question was all over the media. But they're gone now, right? They couldn't care less. Then it was Ukrainian Nazis somehow that got all their love and support. Now it's Israeli genociders. I mean, whatever they're instructed to believe are the victim of something, that's what they are going to care about, because they have no necessity for an improvement now in the real world.
Right, and I feel like for a lot of these people, the acceptance of socialism is less rooted on their objective material conditions in terms of like the class position they occupy, but the fact that because the contradictions of imperialism have intensified so much, they can't live the lives that they were promised to live in the past. Like capitalism is supposed to be able to sustain this sort of PMC middle class, specifically American capitalism, the heart of the empire, is supposed to be able to offer them a comfortable lifestyle that creates the sort of material conditions for them consenting to the existing order and being the sort of puppets that reproduce and produce at the ideological level the things necessary to get regular people to consent to the existing order. But those conditions are not being met anymore. So as opposed to like, hey, I have this very clear antagonistic relationship with my boss, and I want to change the social structure that keeps me doing work on things that I have no control over and keeps me living in a society where I'm not empowered. The position that they come at it at is almost like a form of resentment. Like I wish it was how it was before, and it's not how it was before. And it's really the sort of people that, and here's what we find with some of the like DSA activists, as soon as the candidates that they're with win, and they're able to get the better salaries and the lifestyles that make them live a little bit more a little bit more akin to how they would have lived, 30 years ago, they sell out. And instead of like the DSA moving the Democratic Party left, it's been the Democratic Party that moves the DSA activists to the right.
Well, yeah, I mean, and we can, AOC is the worst example because she was just an establishment goon from the beginning. But Bernie, over time, becomes the establishment because that was what was necessary for him to stay there. he could get X done if he did Y. So he did Y. The next time to get A done, he's got to do B and C. So he does B and C to the point where he's doing A, B, C, D all the way through X for just a very hope at Y. And then once that hope at Y is just gone, he's nothing but the whole alphabet, right?
Mhm.
To keep the analogy going. I hope that didn't get too far away from me. What I was originally trying to say, though, was that these middle class liberal neighborhoods, there's a reason the Democrats go to them because they know that they only have one type of vote: the rich people who will believe what they say vote. That's
Right.
it.
No, you're absolutely right. Thank you so much to our comrade, our brother Sam Dixon,
Thank
a
you,
member
brother.
signed up for a member for 8 months. It's a people's funded institute, grassroots funded institute. So these donations and membership signups are so essential for just allowing the institute to survive financially. Demonstrations in SAC are only getting bigger and are turning into direct action. Last week we shut down the California Democratic Convention. We saw that. We watched some videos of it and observed some of the police repression. I believe it was there. It might have been another one, but I apologize if it was. Pro-Palestine organizations are popping up all over. The movement is growing. It absolutely is, and that's part of what we've been trying to showcase every single stream. Not just the atrocities, but also the beauty that can be found in the fact that people from all over the world are saying this is our fight too. We can't just let this happen before us. There was a slogan that Medea Benjamin posted a picture of. Someone at a rally, they had a poster that said, "You fucked with the wrong generation," and I think that encapsulates this perfectly. Like, you fucked with the wrong generation. We're not letting this happen. Poll after poll shows that more than 80% of people 18 to 35 are on the side of Palestine against genocide. And what is the youth if not the future? So this is I'm very hopeful for this generation. It's Allende once made the statement that it's a biological contradiction to be young and not a revolutionary. But I think there's something special
Mm.
in this case because we've never really had as widespread as we do now this revolutionary fervor in the youth. You could look at various other periods, the 60s, the struggle against the war in Vietnam, the civil rights movement. It was still much more polarized than it is now. The youth is usually on the right side of history nowadays.
Yeah, back before the civil rights revolution, the bourgeoisie was able to win the consent of the majority uh, by way of separate the not that they did this purposefully back then, but it was sort of the natural separation arising out of chattel slavery. They were able to win that consent by opening up the middle classes and losing some fights in the class struggle, but keeping those sections, the black working class, for example, out of that middle they opened up, right? And that was key to winning that consent. But that middle is gone. This is the era of the reproletariat. And the reproletariat is this generation, right? When we speak in terms of generations, frankly, I'm a little ashamed of mine if we call me part of Generation X. I'm I'm like the year between X and millennial. So, I'll say millennial. um, but yeah, it was a do nothing generation. Everyone's like, I'm just an individual, man. I'll do my own thing, man. And we'll listen to Nirvana and everything will be fine. But we listened to Nirvana and everything was not fine. All this was going on. And we're now at the point where it has to change. And this new generation is so incredibly inspiring in this regard. They keep me fighting, for one. And it's just amazing to see, to watch this sort of like you said, Carlos, beauty of a people coming together and saying no. and saying, and as that no gets louder and louder with every voice that's added to it, the question, now what do we do about it, always comes up. And guess what? We know what to do about it, right? It's always the same solution. The issue is that back in the day, there was no necessity because the middle class was there as a bulwark against those who would rise up because of that necessity, right? That's why the civil rights revolution was a largely black proletarian thing, right? Because they were the revolutionary edge of the class because of those conditions. And now it's everybody. Everybody has a necessity. Now, in this post civil rights revolution world, we're also more united than ever before in history. Ever before in history. Think about that. And think about the possibility that has. It's a beautiful thing. You're absolutely right. Um,
Can I say something real quick? Because we've been talking about the middle class left,
mm,
and then we talk about the death of the middle class, and I want to flesh this out a little bit. One of the things that has always been conjoined to the concept of the middle class and its existence was that part of why it was middle was because it literally constituted, it was seen to constitute half of the population. Like half of the population is in this block in the middle. 25% or a smaller percent is at the top, another percent is at the bottom. But if there was like a distribution of the population in terms of like income, the middle class would make up half of the population of the country at the very least. That's why it was called the middle class. That middle class as middle does not exist anymore. That doesn't mean that like the same occupations, because remember that we think of things as Marxists not in terms of like income distribution, which is how the liberals do, but in terms of like the relationship that the work that you do has to the way we produce for the things that are necessary for society. So the class position of the middle class that reflected itself in a period in that income distribution where they were, half of the population, perhaps a little more, specifically in the white community, that doesn't exist anymore. You still have the class position, you still have some layers of society, but it's shrunken radically. And that means that the people that would have been in there, what's happened to them is that they've been reproletarianized. And that's the theory that Noah's been spearheading here at the Institute. And it's absolutely essential for us to understand the class makeup of our society, the various ideological tensions that are reflected out of those new class conditions that weren't here, 4 decades ago. And it forces us to be creative theoretically and be creative practically.
just like you were saying in the beginning, right? Being creative and actually applying Marxism rather than just copy and pasting the conclusions of Marx or Lenin, who were alive in previous epochs. The reason they're the re-proletariat and not just more new proletarians is because everything's different now, right? I mean, history moves. That's what it does. That's why it's history. And we call them the re-proletariat because it's coming from the middle, right? And just like the original proletarianization that took people out of the peasantry and took what was their stability and property and left them a quote propertyless proletarian, according to Marx and Engels. The re-proletariat has that same thing taken from them, that stability and that property, right? The ability to own a home and create equity and save wealth is property ownership, right? That's gone now. Even owning a home now is not really owning it. It's owning a debt shit for finance because that's all it is. When your value of your home goes up, all that is your property taxes going up, right? The value of that as speculation in some financial institution's portfolio going up. It ain't ever translated to equity for you. Never, never. The whole thing's banking scams all the way down. And this is the world the reproletariat finds itself reproletarianizing into, which is also post NAFTA, post deindustrialization. So all those giant factories that create the proletariat and give them a place to go when they have no property to sell their labor, they're gone, right? They're gone. What we get thrust into now is low wage, menial service labor and debt, doing work a robot could do and being forced to do it with a fucking smile, which is so goddamn degrading that I want to punch every dumb McDonald's corporate manager in the face for forcing that shit on human beings. I'm sorry to swear, it's a little late, but holy shit.
We got a lot of good comments in. Thank you so much, Comrade Ross, the official sugar daddy of the Midwestern Marx Institute. I'm a Xenial too, Nirvana plus Not Fine. Yeah, I mean, the 90s gave us great music and great movies. I actually just recently watched the trilogy from Before Sunset. I had never seen it before. I think it's Before Sunset, After Sunset, and Before Midnight. It was
it's like fancy, like artsy movies, man.
Yeah, the indie.
I didn't know you were so cultured.
It's like the archetype of the indie movie. No, I really appreciate it. The first one was, as usual, a lot better than the other ones. But Sean Moon makes some interesting points here. Of course, there's some gems in Generation X, and we learn from all of our elders and previous generations. But the point is that what we're seeing now in terms of youthful radicalism, I think it's something we've never seen before in the U.S., and it's because we're dealing with conditions we've never seen before in the U.S.
Yes. You mentioned Seattle, and the battle for Seattle was huge, right? But the point is, it was isolated and singular and really didn't accomplish anything. And you know what? A fun fact, guess what it was against? The globalists and globalization, right? Terms that I've used with people because they understand them and got called an evil, what's the word? Pat soak, pandering to the right. So they were anarchists using those words.
Right, yeah. No, it was a left, like originally the term was a left thing. Cordy says it makes so much sense when you say we're the most united generation. I understand why more than ever the capitalist class bombards us with culture and distraction. Absolutely. And we'll get into that in a little bit when we share the Parenti quote and discuss it in the context of how ideology functions through the media. Sean Moon says, I think a far better description is lumpenization of the formerly middle class, a total degradation, humiliation. I would disagree with that simply because the lumpen, we have this misunderstanding in the American left of what the lumpen is. We assume the lumpen is just the poorest sectors of society, the most precarious, and that's not what the lumpen is. Sometimes the lumpen arises out of those sectors, but the lumpen is basically the criminal class, the part of society that's so declassified, degraded, so poor that it opens itself up to doing, scabbing, crime, all these different other activities. And it's always been a class that the Marxists have been extremely critical of. In Cuba, for example, when someone calls you lumpen, it's synonymous with antisocial. It's a class that, culturally, it's extremely antisocial, and it's like the class of delinquents. And, we can have a good systematic analysis of the society that produces this and how we can't really blame the people that are in these positions because they're the result of a system that makes it necessary for there to be a lumpen proletariat. But that's not what's going on right now with the precarity that we see from the previous middle class that has been reproletarianized.
100%. And remember, I was within that lumpen for years. And I was addicted to drugs. And I'm 16 years clean now, by the way, very like it was a different person. But one of the reasons it's like it was a different person is because these designations talk a lot about our social consciousness and what is created by the relationships we must enter into socially, right? And the lumpen relationship is parasitic in all directions. It is always using and being used, and using or being used. I've done things that I will carry shame for my entire life because of that, right? That still haunt me right now to this day. That I work every day to try to make up for in some stupid, I do good things now to make up for the bad things, like mental, rationalization thing. But the lumpen proletariat becomes a lumpen proletariat as this happens on a large scale. I'm friends with a lot of reproletarians, right? Carlos is a reproletarian. It's not like that, right? It's not a lumpenization. I get where your head's at, Sean. It's really just a clarification of the underclass, the criminal class, really, or as Marx and Engels called them, the dangerous class.
Right, and there's no need to like shame or something. We know the system that produces this. I think part of the problem is that we assume that all non-stable employed people are lumpen. And Marx has a category that's often ignored. It arises in like the middle of volume 1, which is that capitalism produces a relative surplus population. Relative surplus population. This relative surplus population includes a whole host of various people whose existence on the one side is indispensable for the system. The system has to produce it. But on the other side, they're expendable. So they exist in this interesting contradiction of like utmost expendability and simultaneously utmost indispensability. Amongst this relative surplus population, you have people that are in precarious employment, the reserve army of the proletariat. You have the lumpen proletariat. You have populations that don't work, disabled populations. You have the elderly that are retired. You have various positions that are considered superfluous by capitalist society because they do
not. Let me cut in real quick, Carlos. Just a quick example. I once talked to a guy who was trying to tell me he was lumpen because he was disabled. You're not lumpen.
Right.
No, that's not what lumpen proletariat means.
Insofar as they're not classes that consistently are producing surplus value that gets realized into profit, they're lumped into this sort of class, but they're still necessary, right? It's the fact that those classes exist that allow the capitalists some leverage over the working class. It's the fact that there's always a reserve army of the proletariat that makes workers think twice when approached with the question of like striking, because they can lose their job and then they just hire whoever's out there in need of a job. So it's a sort of surplus population that plays an indispensable role for capitalism. And the relative part is important because it's surplus for capitalism. In another system, all of the population capable of working would have good paying jobs. That work that's necessary for society would be distributed such that you don't have some people working 12 hours or 8 hours and other people working 2 or 4 a day. Ideally you'd want to lower the amount of necessary social labor as much as possible so that you could elevate the amount of socially available free time, so that people can be free and do whatever the fuck they want. Develop certain virtues, learn how to play the violin, the fiddle, whatever might be the case. But let's get into this stream plan.
We've been going for 45 minutes and haven't touched it.
Right. So
very, very Carlos and Noah.
Unless you've been living under a tree, you should know by now that Javier Milei, one of the craziest individuals on the planet, was just elected president of Argentina. This is, it's insane. I mean, we're going to break it down and provide a Marxist analysis of it. But it reminds me very much, not to say that he's a fascist or a Nazi or whatever, but Argentina is a very special population because they have like the most philosophy shows on TV. You'll just turn on TV and there's like at least at any given moment 3 or 4 or 5 philosophy shows that air consistently in various national airwaves. It's a very educated population, but then they vote for idiots like this by an overwhelming majority. And it reminds me of Nazi Germany. Like in terms of the education that people had, there was a high level of education. There was a lot of educated people in Nazi Germany at rates that were higher than some of the other countries. But a lot of them consented to Hitler's deeply irrational rule. So let's look at this classic video of Milei describing what he'll do with each one of the central federal departments.
Ministerio de Turismo y Deporte, afuera. Ministerio de Cultura, afuera. Ministerio de Ambiente y Desarrollo Sostenible, afuera. Ministerio de las Mujeres y Género y Diversidad, afuera. Ministerio de Obras Públicas, afuera, aunque te resistas. Ministerio de Ciencia y Tecnología e Innovación, algo bien del sector privado. Nada bueno salió del sector público, afuera. Ministerio de Trabajo.
All these ministries, gone. The government doesn't do anything right. It's the private sphere that does everything creative and positive.
Empleo y Seguridad Social, afuera. Ministerio de Educación, adoctrinamiento, afuera. Ministerio de Transporte, afuera. Ministerio de Salud, afuera. Ministerio de Desarrollo Social, afuera.
Can you pause it real quick?
It's these answers.
You know what I hear? You know what I hear while he's saying everything like this? Homework, afuera. Bedtime, afuera. Listening to my mom, afuera. Like, come on, son.
Oh my God. He hasn't spoken to his parents in 8 years. Like, it's literally the meme of infantilism of don't tell me what to do, mom and dad, but elevated to the level of a political ideology that's now going to rule a country.
From a spoiled rich kid who, by the way, has never worked a single day in his life. He was an economist, right? At Corporación America, which, I mean, and then he's funded by these same cartels, by the way, right now. The idea that, like, this guy, like, who's never worked, doesn't understand how anything works, is just going to come in and say, oh, the government is bad because things are bad. Like, it's just so childish. And let's take an example that the right-wingers who may be watching us after my last conversation know about. Guns, right? Is the gun bad? Because the gun was used in the school shooting, do you get rid of guns and not allow anyone to have one? Or do you focus on the problem underlying and try to actually understand why the school shooting happened and how we can prevent it? Right? Because just doing away with guns, you're still going to have murder. Get rid of the reason for murder.
Oh, absolutely. And that's I mean, Argentina has so many countries in the global south. It's just a clear archetypical example of neocolonialism and imperialism in the stage that it achieved after the Second World War, where finance capital really consolidates at a level even higher than the one Lenin was describing in the late 1910s. Yep. So it's ransacked by debt. Most of the debt it continues to take out is put in the service of paying for debt. That's that's part of the centerpiece of the IMF and the World Bank.
Right.
That's one of the things that the BRICS New Development Bank is trying to combat. Dilma Rousseff has mentioned that the only real conditionality is not just that they're aren't conditionalities as there are with the IMF and the World Bank, where they force policies of privatization, austerity, liberalization, and deregulation upon countries that take out loans. But the only conditionality is that you can't be taking out loans to pay back loans. That sort of endless cycle of debt has to be combated. And for a period of time, Christina Kirchner was the sort of left Peronist figure that was promoting not paying back the debt. She was clear that there's no way we're going to be able to pay this back. We just have to say, like, fuck it. We're not going to do it. We're not going to let these foreign interests rule our government. We have to restructure ourselves such that the productive capacities of the country are developed, and they're developed in the interest of the Argentinian people. She was a sort of left-wing, almost flirting with socialist figure. She was always within the same groups of the pink tide, with Cuba, with Bolivia, with Venezuela, Nicaragua, with Correa and others for a period of time. And the transformation wasn't able to go as deep as perhaps you would have wanted it to go. And essentially what the Argentinian people have faced is a deterioration in their living standards, and impoverishment, and indebtedness, and they're tired of it. And what is offered to them in this election is this maniac with all these funny antics, saying that he's going to bring everything that they have come to hate because it's destroyed their life, and that system is neoliberalism. He's going to bring all of it down. And the other option that they have is Massa, who's someone that, and this is a point that I was in Mexico City recently. I did a panel. One of the people that I did the panel with was a Argentinian communist, 85-year-old legend, Beatriz Raglan. And one of the things that she mentioned was that when Southcom came to Argentina late 2022, they set a series of demands of things that they wanted to see, and then they phrased it within, you don't have to follow it, but this is what the U.S. would like to see out of Argentina. When you look at the discourse of unity, of all these different, it's Massa, the centrist candidate. His whole discourse was aligned with the discourse that Southcom had suggested that Argentina take. So when you have that condition that becomes very visible to the Argentinian people, and there's no institutional left alternative, it's very clear how these demagogues that present themselves as radical arise. And what needs to be understood, and this is the same thing with Trump, is that these figures that are presenting themselves as anti-establishment, as anti-system and anti-government, what they're doing is not a break with what you've had up to now. They're not breaking with it. Their radicalism is rooted in a deepening of the same processes that you have came to hate. Because that's what Milei is going to do. All he's going to do is deepen and make more profound the same neoliberal bourgeois transformations that have destroyed the lives of the Argentinian people and enriched a small group of neocomprador politicians and the national bourgeoisie in Argentina, along with the foreign bourgeoisie, American bourgeoisie, that benefits from the looting of Argentina's people's resources and the super exploitation of their labor. So,
yeah, 100%. I'm sorry. I thought I was interrupting you, and I stopped.
It's a difficult thing, because if there's no, how do you? It's hard to make fun of the Argentinian people, because it's not like there's a communist party that can rival Massa.
Right.
From what I heard from the comrades out there, the institutional communist party, not unlike another country we know, just tails the neoliberals, because on certain social policies they're more quote unquote progressive or more enlightened than the conservatives. So where do the people go? They're tired of what is, and they have no choice for an institutional left promising something different. All they have is a charlatan from the right who's saying we're going to bring everything down. And most people are just, they don't have the time to sit down and really analyze, well, how how did these transformations, very akin to Pinochet, how did they work out in Chile? They're not
Right.
like
How did they work out in Russia?
exactly. So it's hard to never blame the people.
Right.
I'm always against blaming the people, and I've seen some of that in some leftist pages in Spanish, but what other alternative did they have? Clearly, the Massa and neoliberal regime was undurable, and now what they'll find is that Milei is going to be perhaps even more undurable. So it's tough.
Yeah.
We'll see. Hopefully, the communists can advance and organize and use this as an opportunity to radicalize people against the neoliberal regime. But we also can't forget the lawfare that was used against Christina Kirchner, so that she couldn't run. So it's complicated.
Look, I just did an interview for RT about this guy.
Do we want to put that on, by the way, at some point, or you think it'll be dangerous?
We may not want to risk the demonetization because it's RT.
Right.
It was very, what actually aired was very short. It was only a very small piece of the entire interview. But in it, I talked about, look, he gets elected for the same reason Trump did, because people are tired of the same status quo, making their lives worse and worse, and need, not just want, but need change. And this guy is the only one offering any sort of change. And I guarantee you talk to them, they'll be like, yeah, anarchism, silly, I know. But he's talking different. He at least has a plan. Let's see if he can do it. Because regular people don't know the history of this stuff. They don't know that when we actually apply their utopianism in the real world, it makes things even worse. And here's something I told RT. There's a reason that we call them anarchitties. The whole thing bad, get rid of bad thing narrative, it displays just an astonishing lack of critical thinking for someone that's about to take high office. I can't tell if he's like the sort of giant media conglomerates and think tanks that promote this stuff, simply using it, cynically, right, to get rid of the few restrictions that are already on them, and, enact a regulatory capture, stuff like that, turn the people into modern day debt peons, basically. Or if he genuinely believes in it, right? If he does genuinely believe in it, and I'm tending to think that's the case, I'd say simply that there's never, ever, ever such a thing as the state as such. There is only certain kinds of states that develop objectively. There's certain kinds of conditions to serve certain kinds of people, certain classes of people, right? When do we mature enough to understand that? Or when does he rather mature enough to understand that? When does he mature enough to understand that the state is a real thing that must be respected for what it is and understood for what it is, rather than whined about and yelled about like a toddler having a temper tantrum? Yes, I understand. The bourgeois state is messed up. Now ask that next question. Why? What purpose does it serve? And how many more millions need to be impoverished before people like Milei can ask that simple question, can just be a fucking man and ask a question rather than a whining child? Is it 2 million or 10 million? How many million need to be impoverished? Because that's exactly the direction that he's going to head things into. There's no other outcome here. There isn't.
Dude, this guy is also, I think he genuinely believes in it. I think he's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
I think so.
He gets political advice from his dead dog, whom he's cloned. I think 5 times or something. He follows this one like ultra right neoclassical economist Murray Rothbard, who like had connections with KKK, endorsed David Duke's run, was pro-segregation, was like Millet in favor of having like a child free market. Right now, one of the things he's pushing for is removing the ability for women to get abortions and creating a child market so that children could be sold to. So it's just completely. It's he's a madman. He goes around with the chainsaw, as someone here mentioned that he goes around with the chainsaw. He's talked about privatizing streets so that people going in and out of neighborhoods have to pay to go in them. He's a complete nut job, super Zionist. He wants to break off all trades with the communists, whom he includes, not just the actual communist China, but also Brazil. But together with China and Brazil, that makes up like 35 to 40% of the trade that Argentina has. Argentina was one of the countries, the new set of 6 countries that joined BRICS in the last conference in Johannesburg. That would have been tremendous for Argentina.
Carlos. Just real quick. That 30% of their trade is ginormous because their export margins are abysmal, right? They're the country with this, like the second richest copper and lithium reserves in the entire world. And why do they do zero export? It's because of how messed up and inflationary their entire outward and inward system is, right? And just getting rid of it all and refusing to trade because mommy and daddy are mean. Like, come on, son. I'm sorry. And you know what else bothers me? Real quick, go back to what you're saying. But him acting like a tough guy bothers me. I saw him in that stupid superhero costume and then ripping a chainsaw around talking about the leftards. Like, try that shit around here, son. Try it around here.
And, this is a figure that I don't even think we have a comparison to him in the U.S. because you can't compare Trump, who, suggested for a period of time, like disbanding NATO, and who at least talked in some parts of his discourse in ways that were actually quote unquote anti-establishment, even if there was no substance behind it. Millet is like super Zionist, which Trump is as well. He wants to dollarize
the flag instead of his own flag.
He said the first place that he's going to visit after he gets elected is Israel. He's super pro Ukraine. He lumped in Russia as one of the quote unquote communist countries. And he's destroying the one opportunity that Argentina had to potentially get out of the hole, which it probably wouldn't have happened, even with Massa. But, joining BRICS would have been tremendous. It would have allowed for new development projects to arise in Argentina so that they could put their natural resources to use and develop industries and, not just import everything. So it's a tremendous setback. I don't think it's going to hit BRICS that hard. I think there was a lot more that BRICS was offering Argentina than what Argentina was offering BRICS. But it's still a setback.
The of Argentina is what BRICS got from that deal.
Right. And it shows if you're a socialist, you have to let go of all of these assumptions that are created by bourgeois ideology, specifically concerning like the so-called peaceful pluralistic transfer of power, which de facto all it does is stifle development and create conditions so that even if people's candidates win, they can always be overturned through lawfare or whatever other means, in order to shift the balance of power back to the bourgeoisie, who it's their state that you're working with if you're a working class party that gets into a position of power. So without a radical transformation, you're always going to be open to stuff like this happening to your country. And at the geopolitical level, this is what makes like these alliances like BRICS between non-communist country very difficult, because you have these potentials for vacillations within countries like Argentina, India for a while after BRICS was developed. The Modi Hindu nationalist government for the first period of it was not very friendly to BRICS and was very pro-US. Now, as of late, he's kind of vacillated a little more, but it's that inconsistency that makes planning and development more difficult. That's all made a lot easier if you have, okay, we're going to have a People's Party, which is going to be the Communist Party. It's going to lead society. We're going to have our long-term plans, our middle-term plans, our short-term plans. And that's basically how China runs. That's why it's the most successful country on the planet. So, yeah. By the way, as soon as he's elected, stocks soar, bonds climb, U.S. bonds climb. So who's benefiting? It's after these things happen in geopolitics, go look at the stock market. See who benefits. Cui bono? That Leninist question. Who benefits?
1,000%.
It's very clear that it's the elite, not just in Argentina, but the global elite, the financial elite. They benefit from.
And that's all I want to make clear here is that the stock market doing better does not mean regular people are doing better. It generally means the opposite. The way this capital is accumulated, right, in the age of speculation, even before that, the stock market wasn't a read of us, right? But in the age of speculation, all it means is that we're in a period of high buy-in speculation for the speculators, for them who are parasites on us. Anyone telling you that the stock market means something's doing better is on the other team. Also, I just want to say real quick, this guy is like if Reddit became president of Argentina or whatever. He's Reddit. Literally, like, the guy just believes what he reads in Von Mises blogs. I don't understand. Is it that haircut that makes him that stupid? An anarchist in 2023. It's 2023.
It's just stupidity that leads to the haircut. See, the other way around. But thank you so much.
Flip it on his head, brother. Flip it on his head.
Thank you so much, Comrade Aaron, for the $10 super chat. Feel free to ask a question if you have any. But again, it's a people's funded grassroots institute. So all of these donations are just tremendously appreciated. And if you want to support our institute financially in a more consistent way, also consider becoming a YouTube member like Sam did earlier for 8 months, or becoming a Patreon. If you become a $10 Patreon, I believe you get an ebook copy of my book, The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism. And I believe it's the same thing for YouTube members. But I have a few more stories to get through. There's a big one here of Cardi B, someone who has a lot of cultural influence in the U.S. She recently came out saying that she won't be supporting Biden following the amount of funding, billions of dollars that he's sent over to Ukraine to support she didn't add this part, but concretely to support the proxy war against Russia. And, the billions of dollars that we send to Israel to support not just the genocide of the Palestinian people, but also the proxy war against Iran. That's at the geopolitical level, the troika of evil is, of course, Iran, Russia, and China. So all while having American cities crumble and having American people in need, indebted, impoverished, struggling with inflation, realizing that their paychecks are not enough to consume the necessary things that they need to survive, and if they are, they're just barely scraping by. And we have more than 60% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. that means that they're a lost paycheck away from joining the 600,000 people homeless wandering around in a country with more than 33 times as many empty homes as homeless people. So Cardi called out these contradictions, the way in which, as Parenti would say, the empire feeds off the republic. And she said that she won't be supporting Biden, that New York is crumbling. They're cutting funding for various things that are needed in New York, sanitation, amongst other things. And in the meantime, they're sending billions abroad to support empire. So, Noah, I see Noah just left for a second. But these are important things to point out. And Cardi's someone with quite a bit of influence. I remember when she came out in support of Bernie Sanders, that brought some new people in. It's very sad that there's a lot of people that base their thinking on the basis of what celebrities think. But insofar as we got celebrities like Cardi B, someone that's very much rooted in the people, someone who comes from poverty herself, who remembers what it's like to be poor, and who's able to see this poverty and these contradictions, how we send billions and billions of dollars abroad to fight wars that do not benefit the American people, and then cut spending to the very few programs that we have that make our lives somewhat bearable.
Well, maybe that's what we need to do then, is just turn you into a celebrity, Carlos. Oh, he leaves as I reveal my grand plan to start the Carlos Garrido reality TV show.
No, let's do it with Eddie.
Being Carlos, right?
Well, we got to do it with Eddie. That's the institute member with the most celebrity potential. But
dude, I would watch a reality show about Eddie's life. No joke. Like, he's one of the hardest working men I've ever met in my life. And I'm not just saying that because he's my friend. When he's not, dedicating himself to the class struggle and building the institute, he's training like a monster. I mean, I work out daily, but this guy works out. I mean, what I do pales in comparison to him. I look like a middle-aged mom in spin class compared to him. It's just fascinating. He's got so much drive and dedication. It's inspiring.
And no offense to middle-aged moms in spin class. Do your thing.
My wife is a middle-aged mom who does spin classes, by the way. But and I actually, she recently got a Peloton, and I totally ride that Peloton. That's my cardio now. That's like part of my workout is that Peloton. It's very cool. You get to like compete against other people, which always makes me go harder when there's someone else I can beat. Yeah, I don't know. I'm getting tired. This is like so late at night for me. Like, my mind's going.
We have a couple stories to go. Let me know if you'd like to stay and cover them with me, or
if they're quick.
Yeah. There's some quick ones here. The youth has come out, and we were talking earlier about the revolutionary potential of the youth, and someone mentioned, I believe it was Sean Moon in the chat, how part of that revolutionary potential is the dominance that they have over, not the dominance, but the skills that they have with the new technologies, the way that they're able to do these sorts of videos that are brilliant, very funny, and the sort of things that go viral and that are very well made and apt to the age that we live in. So let's give this funny video a watch and get your reaction.
I think here this is the most important piece of evidence that we have against Hamas here. As you can see, this is a dress that civilians wear. What is this, you may ask? Hamas tunnels. This is a map of Hamas tunnels. You can see here, they all wear it, and Hamas finds where the tunnels is.
Yeah, I feel like this is just some normal dress design.
Are you at this sympathizer? Do you want Israel to die? Is this what you're saying?
Oh.
Cut! Bro, give me another reporter. What the fuck? What this says, whenever we come close to their tunnels, as you can see, it senses and it says Allah Akbar. Listen to this. Allah Akbar.
Oh,
It says Allah Akbar.
that looks like a normal fire alarm to me.
God! I told you to get me another reporter. What is this? I think here this is the most important piece of evidence that we have against.
That's beautiful, because that's like as legitimate as the actual evidence that Israel is providing, which is not evidence at all. It's so ridiculous. It's laughable. It's disrespectful to our intelligence. They think we're all a bunch of idiots who are not going to question, with a fresh off the print copy of Mein Kampf in a kid's what? A fucking a calendar with the weekdays in Arabic that
Yeah,
they're
but
saying.
Carlos, you condemn Tuesday or not?
That's that Rania Khalek joke. Do you condemn Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? Yeah, no, it's ridiculous, man. There was a heartwarming moment in a recent flight where the pilot went up to a Palestinian passenger and told him some nice words of solidarity. Let's give that a watch.
That's what's up right there. That is what's up.
So there you go. None of that, Western leftist bullshit of you have to condemn Hamas, and also you can condemn Israel, but you must condemn Hamas. You must call for the overthrow of Hamas. What? The global South is on the side of Palestinian resistance, regardless of the form that it takes. But the reality is that the form you think it takes is not the actual form it takes, because the form that you think it takes is mediated by a fuckload of Israeli propaganda that is created to get at your emotions, to present you with atrocities that any rational human being will condemn, without understanding the context, without understanding whether it's real or not. But the whole point is to dehumanize the Palestinian resistance fighters who, we're not Muslims, we're communists, we're Marxist-Leninists, but these people are guided by Muslim morality that, just putting two and two together, you would realize that the sort of things that they're claiming that they do it's completely unheard of. I have a lot of Muslim friends, I follow some Muslim pages. It's what the Israelis paint Hamas, a Muslim Palestinian resistance group as doing, and the understanding that I have of Islam and the people that are guided by the moral principles of Islam, it's just two completely different universes. And, those contradictions are evident to anyone who's been in contact with one and then listens to what are being like rapes and beheadings of what? It's completely absurd, and it ends up being just a buttload of projection on the part of the Zionist fascists.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what it is? It's Trotskyism. All it is Trotskyism. It's, I'm a socialist, but that real socialism is terrible. We need to first condemn this terrible real world socialism because we stand for something better, man. We want that freedom too, but when it happens in the real world, it's evil. Like, don't get me wrong, that's evil. Liberation in actual reality, in real terms, children being able to eat, that's evil. Okay? But the idea, that's cool, man.
Absolutely. It's a lot more purity fetish thinking. If reality doesn't measure up to the pure ideals, the fancy, lofty ideals that are in my head, I will be condemning the meanness of reality and sustaining the purity of the ideal. And the paradox is that not only are they not engaging with the reality they condemn for the ideal, but what they're rejecting is a caricature of reality. So it's an even deeper ideological process and forms of false consciousness. But here's a video of healthcare workers calling for a ceasefire, and we've seen the bombing of hospitals, of ambulances. We've all seen the videos online of Palestinian doctors, treating there was recently a video that came out yesterday of a Palestinian doctor treating his child, doing an operation on his child that had lost its limbs, and because they didn't have anesthesia, the process was so painful that they died from the pain. It's horrific what's going on over there, and how the little bit of a healthcare system that is left, the conditions that these nurses and these doctors are put in, the things that they're forced to see, a lot of them killed by the bombs. It's so horrific. So here we see some healthcare workers calling for a ceasefire.
Thousands of healthcare workers across the world to demand a ceasefire in Gaza now. I can say that you need to support the stop of targeting of hospitals. We support health, we support healthcare, and we support the health and the well-being of Palestinian children. And as a Jew, I say stop the killing in my name. Today is World Children's Day, and more than 5,000 Palestinian children have been killed. It is not to be the place, because he has the power, and he has not demanded a ceasefire, and he has not condemned Israeli war crimes. People are dying. People are having surgery without anesthesia. Can you imagine that? Without anesthesia. Children. Can you imagine watching children and elders dying, and you're helpless, finding your brother, your mother, your grandmother at your feet while you're working? That's what's happening, and we have the power to stop it. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now.
Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now!
So that's beautiful to see. One of the things that we've been talking about is the fact that not all protests are equal. Shutting down a bridge where you're preventing working people from getting to work or coming home from work doesn't do more harm than good. Are the people there, the thousands of people that are stuck in traffic, are they going to be won over to your side? And what we need is the people. We need to win people over to our side so that we can have more and more and more and more. And it becomes evident to our ruling class that everyone is against what we're doing. We should change this policy of funding and equipping the Israeli Zionist regime in their genocide of the Palestinian people. Or do we do the sorts of protests that inconvenience the powers that be, that inconvenience, these sorts of meetings, that inconvenience L3 Harris in Canada and BlackRock and the different weapons manufacturers that are shipping out weapons to Israel and making a fucking killing out of a genocide. And this is it's one of the most sickest parts of the modern capitalist system. The fact that these people literally make a killing out of killing. It's despicable.
Yeah, you said it all. I couldn't put it any better. It's disgusting, and there's a reason that we find it disgusting. There's a reason our bodies have this emotional response, right? Where I don't know if you guys are like me, like my stomach will turn when I see the genocidal propaganda or the effects of the bombs. And then like my heart gets sort of full when I see things like this video we just watched. There's a reason that these things happen, right? It's because we can recognize the humanity of the Palestinian struggle as what is essentially human in the situation, right? What is essentially a reflection of us as fellow human beings. And we don't even have to bring class into it for that. But of course, class is part of who we are as human beings. And so even more than that, we can see the struggle that all of us engage in, whether we know it or not, daily, in its most acute form, in its most pressing form in their struggle now. And it's heart-wrenching, right? Yeah, I don't know. I'm starting to really fade, brother. That's all.
Thank you so much, Sean. this monster super chat, $50. Thank you so much, brother. As we've said before, it's a grassroots, people-funded institute. So these super chats are tremendously appreciated. You guys don't know how much we appreciate these. These are keeping the publishing press and all these great ideas that we have for the institute. The reason why we can do them is because of this financial supporting. We're not in socialism. If we were in a socialist country, ideally, it'd be the state that would fund an institute like ours, but that's not where we're at yet. So again, tremendously appreciated, brother. Trade with China was a disaster for Midwestern unionized workers. It was. NAFTA, Bill Clinton destroyed. There's a lot of really good movies as also on that era. We were talking about the 90s not being a very revolutionary period, but there's a really good movie from Denzel Washington where he's a former union worker. His job gets shipped out, and so a bunch of people are laid off, and a bunch of other people are forced to work part-time. And because he's working part-time, he doesn't have the insurance, and his little girl gets sick. She needs a heart transplant. They can't get it, so he's forced to basically take over the hospital and force the doctor at gunpoint to do the surgery, and it's a beautiful movie that shows the ridiculousness, not just of our system that ships out our jobs abroad so that they can super exploit the Chinese workers, but also of these other parts within the system, including the healthcare system, that instead of having its telos, its end, its goal, its purpose be serving the people, keeping the people healthy, making sure that they're healthy, its purpose is profit. And so we have all these middlemans that are making a killing off of keeping us sick and not properly treating us and not actually fulfilling the needs that we need fulfilled in order to be healthy.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just want to take a crack at this question.
Let's finish reading it, though, because I only read the first part.
Oh, my bad. Go ahead.
CEOs recently paid respects to the president of China on his recent visit. How would American socialism differ from socialism with Chinese characteristics? Just a purity fetish. That's a really good. Take a stab at it, and then maybe I can take a stab at it.
So I'm going to answer it in 3 parts. The first one, CEOs paid respects to the president of China because he demands that respect from our top people. And that's just who happened to be our top people. The reason that what you're calling trade with China was a disaster for Midwestern workers, not just the unionized ones, is not because of trade with China, though. It's those same people being on top. It's capitalism.
Right.
That's the source of that immiseration, rather than the particular one country that capital had to spread out to and do production in these places. It wasn't, specifically this trading with this country or that. It was instead monopoly finance capital consolidating to such a point, right, where it became necessary and more profitable to do the actual production in all these other countries than pay American workers to produce it right here. So there's 2 factors here, right? Concentration of capital and advancement of technology, and our own class struggle, right? So that's the real reason behind that.
Can I say something real quick?
Differs because it is American socialism. It's based in our struggles, answering our problems.
It's also important to note that conjoined with this process of financialization, you have a long tendency of the rate of profit falling, which was predicted by some guy. I don't know, might be on the screen. And so this presents a dilemma to the capitalist class. Either make your profits or reinvest your capital in a more parasitical form of capital. There you have finance capital, and the percentage of profits made from stock buybacks and rents are just through the roof. Or take whatever productive capital that you want to continue reinvesting in abroad, so that the cost of the variable capital, the labor, is less, and therefore you can sort of minimize the effects of the long tendency of the rate of profit falling within your own country. And that's what happened. And it couldn't have happened any other way within the confines of the system. That's something that we have to understand. We cannot, this idea that we cannot bring the jobs back within the logic of capitalism, because the rate of profits which would be acquired are not worth it for the capitalist. The only way we can bring the productive jobs back, reindustrialize America in a more environmentally sustainable and modern form. Like, look at our fucking trains. Look at the trains of any other developed country. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. The only way we can do these things that bourgeois politicians tell the people that they're going to do, but they structurally can't do, is by moving to socialism, by being in a system, in a mode of life where the goal of doing things is not profit for a small class of individuals, but social good. That's the only way we can literally bring back the jobs. So the jobs left, as you said, Noah, because of the system. Because of the system. It's not China's fault. China benefited from it, of course. It was able to develop, acquire new technologies, and develop the socialist state that's the beacon of hope for most socialists around the world. But it's not China's fault. And one point that I would say about socialism with American characteristics that would differ from socialism with Chinese characteristics, perhaps not that much, but we have this fetish for like the petty bourgeoisie in the US, for like the small business owner, the mom and pop shop. And one of the things that the McCarthyists and the anti-communists use to scare people away from socialism is this idea that they're coming, not just after your toothbrush, but they're going to take your mom and pop shop and whatever small amount of property you have, or the self-earned private property, as Marx calls it, at the end of the first volume of Capital. And that's absurd. That's not going to happen, especially not in the first stages of socialism. Socialism has various stages. I recommend people check out the work that Chang and Fu has done on the 3 stages of socialism, and then lastly, communism. We are definitely going to have auxiliary modes of production. We'll have the state controlling, either through state-owned enterprises or nationalized industries, some of the key industries, the foundation of society, ensuring development and the growth of perhaps new cities, or the redoing of cities that are crumbling, whatever that might look like. And then we'll have auxiliary modes of production. We'll have co-ops, we'll have the small businesses, we'll have all these different modes of production that, perhaps even middle-sized enterprises, larger enterprises, we don't know. For the larger enterprises, of course, we'll have to have Communist Party supervision of these, as there exists in China. But socialism with American characteristics has a lot to learn from socialism with Chinese characteristics. But at the end of the day, it's going to be whatever the people decide has to be done in order to benefit society, not what we decide at a moment in history where, even the idea of grabbing power is so far from us. But Noah, I see you fading. You're doing good, brother. Thank you so much, Sean, by the way, for
thank you, Sean. That's
and the questions.
Absolutely wonderful. Yeah, I'm done, man. I gotta be up at 4:30 again tomorrow, so I'm gonna have to call it a night if that's good with you.
Yeah, that's fine, buddy. Thank you so much for hopping on the first hour and a half.
Of course.
I have a few other stories that I plan on going through if the audience is interested in me going at it alone.
You guys are interested, right? They're interested. They're interested, brother.
Right, brother.
Do your thing. Thank you so much for calling, and always happy to talk to you.
Great job on the conversation with Middle MAGA, by the way. I wanted to say
Thank
that.
you. Thank you. Yeah, I had fun with that. I'm looking forward to the next time I talk to him. But yeah, I'm gonna go roll into bed with the wife. So thank you, brother. All the love in the world to you. See you guys later. And yeah, I'll leave it there. Adios.
All right, brother. Take care. Alrighty. There we go. I like having the Institute stuff on there. Oh, I see that we received another super chat. Thank you so much again, brother Sean. International workers must at some point have enough solidarity to not undercut each other in a race to the bottom. That's absolutely true. Decades of American labor struggle were just obliterated by NAFTA and China trade, no different than scab labor undercutting unions. Yeah, that's a tough question. Because on the one end, it did help the Chinese state develop quite a bit, and just what they were able to acquire technologically because of these connections. And look, I'm not going to sit here and say that had it been the Soviet Union, um, who in that period, of course, we would have been on their side. Had it been the Soviet Union, they would have done the same thing. China's not perfect. China's not homogenous. There's a lot of people within the Communist Party of China that disagree with certain policies, and there's a broad array of debates as to how things should be done, both internally in terms of um, the role of markets and the role of private property within China, and also externally. I have some criticisms of China concerning its not passivity, but the just the fact that it's not acting in the international arena in relationship to socialist countries as the Soviet Union would. The Soviet Union would have never, never, ever allowed Cuba to be in the conditions that it is today. That would have never happened. And China is economically a lot more developed than the Soviet Union ever was. So I know that the primary trading partner, I think them and Venezuela are the primary trading partner that Cuba has. And, the Cuban people, along with Russia, the Cuban people are tremendously grateful for the Russian people and the Venezuelan people and the Chinese people, and the trade that these countries have done with Cuba. But I wish they were a lot more proactive. So there's some areas where it seems like pragmatism takes the upper hand over certain forms of internationalist principles, and I guess it's fair to critique those, but I don't know, because on the other hand, what you have is a situation where if China wouldn't have done what it did to develop, where would the global movement towards socialism be now? Um, it's very possible that had it not been able to develop its productive forces, bridge the international inequality, right? People think of inequality usually just within the country, but we have to look at international inequality between developed imperialist countries and developing global south countries. China was able to bridge that one. And it's since the period of common prosperity with Xi has been focused on bridging the internal inequality that was created in the last 3-4 decades since reform and opening up, that were focused on developing the productive forces. So it's I don't know. Just it's I take the same position there as I do with the fact that they supported various almost fascistic, almost no fascistic regimes like Pinochet in Chile, and China's not perfect. I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, ideally, and I think hopefully now in the Xi era, which I think Xi's part of the left wing of the party. You see that in his from the moment he came in, the fight against corruption, the emphasis on developing Marxist theory, developing institutes and universities that focus on developing Marxist theory, not just in general, but in the context of using that theory to develop Chinese society. So, what I've seen with the Xi era is a more sort of turning up the radicalization button of the Chinese Revolution. So hopefully these sorts of things stop, but we'll see. Good question though, and thank you again so much for the $50, $100 in total that you've given to us. Looking through the chat now, I think this isn't the first stream I've done alone. I've done a couple before, but I usually prefer having someone to speak to on camera. But let's listen in to a recording of an Israeli soldier completely demoralized by the fighting and having what I would call a breakdown. Remember that every civilian in Israel is forced to serve in the IDF, so it's likely that a lot of or at least some percentage of the settlers are not as bloodthirsty genocidal maniacs as the Netanyahu government and the right wing part of the Zionists that is currently in power. But let's listen to this because this provides an interesting picture of the struggle. And I'll comment more after, but let's take a look at this. There are monsters. I can't see them. We're fighting ghosts. Let me turn this down so that I can read it in English. I don't want to die. I've seen my friends dying in front of my eyes. Without the Navy and the fighter jets, we still can't beat them. So that's an interesting picture. We can't move forward even with our tanks. Today, the Palestinians have nothing to lose. There you go. That reminds me quite a bit of Vietnam. You're seeing a population that does not have the technology anywhere near the technology of the empire that they're fighting against, but they have nothing to lose. When people are fighting for their freedom, when their people have their backs against the wall and they have nothing to lose, they'll fight like hell. And there's no breaking of people's spirit when they're in these conditions. I'm always reminded of the quote by the bronze titan Antonio Maceo, one of the key figures in the Cuban Revolution, the first one, the one that was incomplete, where the U.S. participated with a little sprinkle of yellow journalism to nullify, the revolutionary efforts. But one of his quotes is that whoever tries to come and take Cuba, the only thing that he'll be able to take in his hand is the blood-soaked sand. The only thing they'll be taking is the blood-soaked sand. Like if you're coming, we're gonna get you. We're not trading sovereignty for anything. It doesn't matter how backed up against the wall our backs are. We're gonna continue fighting for freedom, and that's the position that any part of the human race community is going to have when they're pushed to the limit, as the Palestinian people have been, living under 75 years of occupation and apartheid. With all the tanks and weapons, we still can't do anything. I want to leave this country. You to come down and listen. Don't tell me to come down. You don't see what I see. I'm begging you. I want to leave from here now. So, there it is. That's very interesting to hear because, a lot of what we're seeing is the extermination, the genocidal war being waged on the people of Gaza and the West Bank. People leave out the West Bank, but there is also still a continued resistance by the liberation forces that is making some breakthroughs and leading to breakdowns in Israeli soldiers, such as the one that we just heard. Recently, some activists in Columbia University, an Ivy League school, protested by throwing out their robes. in protest not just of the genocide and the collusion of the university with the state of Israel, but of the censorship of the anti-genocide protesters. So let's listen into some of the things that they have to say.
Of you with gowns and caps, we're going to go straight to that gate and we're going to deposit these because they are nothing to us. A little over a week ago, more than 1 month in to a bare, unrelenting genocide on the Palestinian people of Gaza, Colombia, faced with a slew of options, of ways of divesting from its complicity in genocide, turned its gaze towards the loudest voices for liberation in Palestine on this campus with one goal: to silence them. Now, I say that I'm a proud alum because I situate myself in a lineage of courageous organizers who have fought for freedom in Palestine and the world over for many generations. You are in a lineage of student organizers who just won't quit.
That's beautiful to see, man. And it reminds me always of Salvador Allende's quote that it's a biological contradiction to be young and not a revolutionary. And it's also great to see what she's doing there. You know, she's situating the struggle of today in a lineage, a long lineage of people who have fought similar struggles for social justice. And that's necessary in every struggle to give the movement that you're in some form of historical legs, some form of way of tracing what you're fighting for, not just in terms of like the present and the future, but in terms of redeeming the past, understanding that people have fought in the past for these things. And at times they've lost their lives, at times they've lost their employment. In this case, perhaps there's been people that have lost, you know, their opportunity to get tenure, or if they're professors, if they're students, they've lost their scholarships. Who knows? People who have put things that were meaningful in their lives on the line in order to speak out against injustice. So it's situating our struggles today in the context of a long history of people that have done it in the past is essential for us understanding that we can't let their struggles die in vain. We have to fight to redeem the past and to recreate not just the present, but recreate a future that's an actual future for young people. Because young people, people my age in this country, are looking at a futureless future. You know, how are we going to own a home? The idea of owning a home for me is just like, there's no universe in which I can consider something like that possible. Like, it's more likely that if I play the lottery on a daily basis, I'll be able to own a home than right now me thinking I'll be able to own a home or have any form of stability, the form of stability that's necessary to, you know, to just work in peace. That's why a lot of the great Black writers, whether it's James Baldwin or Richard Wright or many others, they had to leave the country for a period of time in order to work. Like, it's very hard to do good literary work while you're concerned for your everyday life, while you're under this constant trauma and stress that comes with living in an apartheid society, as we had before the 1964 Civil Rights Revolution led by Dr. King. So let's finish this video.
In the late 1960s and 70s, students rose up for Black liberation, for civil rights, and joined a massive anti-war movement against the war in Vietnam. You are in that lineage. In 1985, students protesting for full divestment from South African apartheid embarked on a 15-day hunger strike and chained themselves to the floors of Hamilton Hall, then the main administrative building. You are in that lineage. And Columbia University is in a lineage of its own, falling in line as it has time and time again on the wrong side of history. You know what they did in
Why does it fall on the wrong side of history? Well, because it is one of the major institutions of the capitalist class which has been, at the very least since 1848, the agents of all the events on the wrong side of history. We must remember that ideology and the ideas that people and classes have, they're not just floating around like fairy dust. They get embodied. And what are they embodied in? Ideological state institutions. They're embodied in institutions like Columbia University and in individuals. And it is through that embodiment in some form of material, tangible space that ideology is able to proliferate itself. So why does Columbia stand on the wrong side of history? Because it is the archetype as an Ivy League university of the institutions where bourgeois ideology is crafted to the needs of the specific time and period and sensibilities of the people that need to be convinced and whose consent needs to be manufactured for the existing order. You're not going to have the institutions of the elite on any other side but the side of the elite carrying on the injustices that humanity fights against.
1985, to the students who were protesting South African apartheid, they sought a court order to have them forcibly removed, threatened them with suspension and expulsion. And then they waited another 6 years to fully divest their funds from South African apartheid. After the US policy had fully shifted course, one of the last in the global order to do so. That is Colombia's legacy. Stand on the right side of history. Stand with your students. Stand with Palestine. Until then, we give back our caps and gowns because we will not engage in any form of meaningful or otherwise collaboration and support of this institution. And so I ask all of you here, with your caps and gowns, raise them high in the air so they can see you. High in the air. All those of you with gowns and caps, we're going to go straight to that gate and we're going to deposit these because they are nothing to us. And I want you to, as we do this, to chant 2 words so that our administrators in the farthest corners of these office buildings can hear us. You can suspend SJP and JVP, but Palestine lives. Palestine lives. Palestine lives. Palestine lives. Palestine lives. All those of you with
Man, that's beautiful to see. I had chills for most of it, man. The resistance to the ongoing genocide has taken so many forms, and it's one of the most beautiful things. We have this tragic event on the one side, the genocide of the Palestinian people, the images, the videos coming out of Palestine, which are horrific. But this resistance is so incredibly beautiful. People from around the world who are taking the time to show up to these protests, to speak truth, to share the truth on their social medias, to do work in convincing the people in their communities, their co-workers. This is amazing to see, because in every one of these cases, what these people realize is that something's on the line, not just morally, which very clearly, how can you live with yourself if you don't speak out against genocide, if you don't do everything you possibly can to stop this, especially when you're in the belly of the beast, the country that's proliferating and funding and equipping the Zionist regime, and that it's the conditions for the possibility of the Zionist regime doing what they're doing in Palestine, in Gaza. How can you live with yourself if you're not fighting against this? How are you going to sleep? How are you going to sleep years down the line when it becomes universally accepted that what's happening right now is a genocide? How are you going to sleep knowing that you did not speak out? For whatever reason, because you were convinced by the bullshit spins and narratives that were given to you, that were fed to you by the media, things that there's very little justification anymore for people to accept, because we have social media and alternative media, and the videos are out there. Some of the videos of the things that have happened to the Palestinian people, they're some of the most viral videos in the internet. Think whatever you want to think about someone like Jackson Hinkle, but his account was, up until a few weeks ago, the most viral account on Twitter. Tens of millions of people engaging with his content on a daily basis, and a lot of what he's been posting, that I could see anyways, has been stuff that condemns the crimes of Zionism, that shows the crimes of Zionism, and that contextualizes this in the fact of Palestinian resistance being rooted in 75 years of an apartheid Israeli regime that was propped up in order to function as a colonial outpost of U.S. first British, then U.S. imperialism in the Middle East. So the information, the truth is out there, and you can find it more readily than at any other moment in capitalist history. The information is extremely accessible for people today. So how are you going to sleep? How are you going to live with yourself years down the line, knowing that you had access to this information, that you probably saw it and dismissed it, and chose to believe the bullshit propaganda it's disrespectful how stupid they think we are, but the propaganda that Israel puts out. How are you going to sleep with yourself? So there's definitely a moral question here, but I think a whole lot of the people that are taking the time to protest and to act and do something, they recognize that there's something in the Palestinian struggle for freedom that is also a part of their struggle. Maybe they're not making these connections very explicit. Maybe they can't articulate how it is that it's the same imperialist ruling class that keeps them poor, that keeps their communities destroyed, that keeps their family members addicted to drugs, and their infrastructure completely collapsed, and that keeps them poor and indebted. That it's the same ruling class doing that to them that is doing this to Palestine. Maybe they can't make those connections explicit, but they're able to recognize at a certain level that the Palestinian struggle is their struggle, that they ought to be in those protests, that they ought to be speaking out and sharing things, regardless of how many messages they get where they're called, terrorist sympathizers or anti-Semitic, which it's absurd, but it's the go-to that these idiots have when dealing with people that are speaking out against genocide. Let's go to another video of activists. Let me pull it up. So these are shut it down for Palestine activists in Denver who disrupted the Colorado legislature special session to bring attention to the genocide taking place in Palestine. Let's give that a watch. 1.25.
It is not a war. It is not a war against the genocide. Has no military. One side has no airport. It is not a war. It is not a war against the genocide. It's been a genocide since 1948.
Oh, this is not a religious issue. This is something for power and greed. Free Palestine! We are scheduled to host a global conference for the people doing the genocide. This is unacceptable. Do you stand with killing thousands of civilians? Do you stand with killing thousands of children? Because a lot of you have been silent. There's blood on your hands, and you will look back at this and you will be ashamed. And if you are remembered at all, you will be remembered on the side of genocide. And you know why you won't run away when we have protests? Because you know that this is indefensible. Indefensible. There are children being killed by U.S.-funded bombs. Do the right thing. Ceasefire now.
Every 10 minutes we wait. That's one more time.
The child had all 4 limbs amputated without anesthesia. So this is not.
That is beautiful to see. And those are the sort of protests that we should be participating in. Make it extremely uncomfortable for business as usual, for the elite and their political puppets and their media puppets. make it extremely uncomfortable for business as usual to continue. And hopefully we change some minds, even in those vampires, those who benefit from the bloodshed and the genocide of the Palestinian people. Thank you so much, QWERTY, for the $2.79, I believe, Canadian dollar super chat. It's a People's Funded Institute, so all of these donations are tremendously appreciated. I'm really bad at doing this part of it, but it's so necessary to let you all know how appreciated this is, and how this is literally the financial ground that allows the Institute to survive, and for us to have some form of planning of future projects that require some form of money to be actualized. Palestine and East Palestine share the same struggle. That's I couldn't have put it better myself. That's on the money. The people of East Palestine were left alone in a circumstance of pollution, where the science behind how they would be affected was being obscured. Their politicians were telling them everything's fine, just stay there, nothing's going to happen, while their water and air and everything else was contaminated. People were getting sick. God knows what the long-term effects of this is going to be for this population in this part of Ohio. So it's horrendous. And the same lack of attention that our government gives our people gets reflected in the attention that they give, and the resources and money and everything else that they give the Zionist state of Israel, and whatever other country allows the U.S. to use that country and its people and its resources as a proxy to fight whatever war the U.S. wants to wage against the enemies of empire. Some of these enemies are socialist, like China, like Cuba. Some of them are not, like Iran and Russia, but are nonetheless pseudo-capitalist, developmentalist states that exist outside of the sphere of influence of empire, and that do not want to live in a world where there's one hegemonic power that imposes their will, their system, their culture on the whole world, arbitrarily, just in the interest of a small group of people within that hegemonic power. So let's thank you so much, QWERTY, again. Let's pull up another video here. Another news segment. As we started the stream, I was trying to look for a story that someone mentioned, and I found that Susan Sarandon had been dropped by her talent agency, UTA, after being vocal about the ongoing genocide happening in Palestine and being at a pro-Palestine rally. Susan Sarandon has been a comrade from the start. She's always been on the right side of history, always been against the hybrid warfare that the U.S. wages on nations that don't want to tiptoe the American imperialist line, nations that don't want their resources looted, their people super exploited for the benefit of American companies and of international global finance capital. So it was expected that she would speak out against genocide and do so fearlessly. And these are the consequences that a lot of these people know are likely to happen if they speak out. And so it's a tremendously courageous act when they do, because they have quite a bit to lose. They'll never have the same to lose as regular working people who can lose a well-paying job and maybe never recover and create the sorts of financial insecurities that can damage whole families, and that can lead to a plethora of other problems within the family. Don't ever lose as much, of course, as the Palestinians, but they'll lose something. And it's very easy when you have this sort of comfort to look away. It might be hard for some of them to sleep, but when you have a Tempur-Pedic pillow, a Tempur-Pedic bed, some nice silk sheets, that makes sleeping a little easier. But yeah, that's very tragic to see that she got dropped. Hopefully she gets picked up. She's a tremendous actress. and someone who's consistently on the right side of history. And this is how capitalism treats the people that speak out against genocide and who are in favor of humanity, are in favor of human freedom. I thought this country was supposed to be founded on the values of the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Why is it that we do this to the people who uphold some of those values for the people of Palestine? Why is it that the people who speak out against genocide lose their right to speech and their right to employment on the basis of exerting their right to free speech? So that's how capitalism works, and that's how capitalism will always work. Free speech is always confined within what is acceptable to the dominant capitalist imperialist order. So before we get to a Parenti quote that I wanted to discuss, I wanted to pull up a thread that the PSL did on the 5 greatest crimes that the Biden regime, they love talking about socialist countries as regimes. We should call them regimes back. I guess a little triggered by that word. But the 5 greatest crimes against humanity that the Biden regime has committed over the course, or that Biden has committed over the course of his career. It's not just his current time in office, over the course of his career. And this is in celebration of his 81st birthday, which was yesterday. So, number 1, Biden participating in the genocide of Palestinians, of course. And here, actually, I wanted to stop here and show a video that Eddie did earlier today that I think does a really good job at contextualizing just how bad Biden actually is. Because when you compare it with someone like Reagan, who was horrendous, when you compare it, as Eddie does here, and it becomes very clear how even someone like Reagan was infinitely superior to Biden on the question of Israel. It's scary, but it contextualizes our situation, how bad things have gotten, how much to the right both parties have gone, and how this strategy of vote for the lesser of two evils is just ludicrous. It's insanity. And I use that term seriously. I'm not being hyperbolic. It was Einstein who said once that doing the same thing over and over and over again within the same conditions and expecting a different outcome is the definition of insanity. And a good chunk of the left has continued to have this policy of vote for the lesser of two evils in hopes of things getting better, and the outcome is always the same. Things get worse for regular working people, and they get infinitely better for the elite, who is always the only group of people that benefits from the actions of both the Democrats and the Republicans, because both are the parties of empire. They're both the parties of the capitalist elite. And when it suits them, the fascistic policies will come out. We cannot have this leftist, idealistic understanding of fascism. We need to have a materialist understanding of fascism, an understanding that's rooted in our analysis of the political economy of capitalism, especially when it enters its moments of crisis. And we need to see fascism not as this thing that just pops in from nowhere, but something that's integral to capitalism, that depicts the moment where consent falls, or when, for other reasons, the most coercive parts of the state come to the forefront in order to repress the rights that have been won by working people and other marginalized groups, parts of the people in general. So if we have this materialist understanding of fascism, treating it as, well, if you're a conservative and you're reactionary in this cultural space, you're the only fascist one, it's absurd. It's very clear once you have a materialist analysis of fascism that it's present in both parties, that both parties act in fascistic ways, because that's just how capitalism is and will always be. The rise of Nazi Germany, the rise of Mussolini, all of them were propped up by big capital, by big business. Check out, if you're interested, the book by, uh, forgetting the name, but the book is called Big Business and Hitler. It's Jack Powell. The book by Jack Powell. It's P-A-W-E-L. Big Business and Hitler. He talks about the funding that big business, people like Ford and others, gave to Hitler, and how they benefited from the Nazi regime. And he's recently described in some of his work all of the philo-fascists, all of the parts of the elite, both the new bourgeois elite and the old school aristocratic elite that loved fascism. They saw it as a way to keep poor people in line and ensure that profit rates are as high as possible. And when you have this historical and materialist understanding of fascism, it's difficult to look at the duopoly and the way that it operates and think, oh, fascism only comes from this one side, not from the other. But let's listen to Eddie.
I want people to understand how disgusting and depraved Joe Biden's Israel policy has been, even in comparison to other American officials historically. Here's journalist Katie Halper comparing Republican President Ronald Reagan's Israel policy to Joe Biden's. When Israel was missile striking and bombing West Beirut the same way that they're doing to Gaza today, Ronald Reagan called up the Israeli prime minister and said that they needed to stop or the U.S. would no longer maintain relations with Israel. He even compared what Israel was doing to the Holocaust and condemned them for killing babies. Now, fast forward to today, where in just a few weeks, Israel has killed over 4,000 children. Joe Biden has offered them more money and weapons in order to continue doing this while refusing to call for a ceasefire. In fact, his press secretary called those calling for a ceasefire disgraceful and repugnant. These people are more pro-war than Ronald freaking Reagan, one of the most hawkish pro-war presidents in American history. And what Ronald Reagan did was not abnormal for U.S. presidents. U.S. officials throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s were always telling Israel to cease the brutality and territorial expansion, saying that they had to abide by international law and the rulings of the United Nations. And this didn't always stop Israel, but at least the U.S. made an attempt. Now, if you look today, Biden is tacitly supporting and actively funding Israel's plan to move 2 million Palestinian people out of Gaza and into the Sinai Desert. He's funding and endorsing the mass murder and territorial expansion that even extremely imperialistic U.S. presidents of the past had condemned. So I can't help but laugh when I hear all these Democrats and liberals crawling out of the woodwork to say, oh, we still have to vote for Joe Biden even though he's sponsoring genocide. He's the lesser of two evils. Guys, this is one of the most evil American presidents we've ever had, and that's saying a lot. He's the face of the American empire as it's reaching an incredibly decrepit stage. He's not even pretending to be against genocide and the forced displacement of Palestinian Arabs at this point. You seriously want us to vote for a person who called peace disgraceful and repugnant? Not going to happen. I'm only voting for a candidate who wants to see these two men tried at the Hague for war crimes, because that's where they belong. This man should be in a jail cell, not the White House.
Facts. Our brother, the Liger, mixture of lion and tiger, spitting facts as always. But I wanted to pull up real quick before I return to the 5 greatest crimes that Biden has participated in his career. So his comment from Comrade Marius: fascism is an objective product of capitalist crisis. Therefore, it's not confined to one bourgeois party, but infects them all. That's absolutely right. And that's the understanding that we must have of fascism, one rooted in the Marxist worldview. I know you all are probably sick and tired of me saying it, but a lot of this goes down to the worldview that we have, the sort of way that we approach the world and the way that we think about, reflect on the things that we experience in the world. And a lot of the stuff that we find from the left, many of whom have the hammer and sickle on their profiles, is not Marxism. In terms of the worldview, which is what Marxism is not a series of conclusions that once you come to accept, I accept that from each according to their needs, to each according, from each according to their needs, to each according to their, Jesus, I'm forgetting the second part of it, to each according to their want? No. Whatever. The quote from the Gotha program: from each according to their needs, to each according to their want, whatever. Communism or being a Marxist is not when you read this passage in the Gotha program and you're like, oh wow, that sounds pretty, I accept it, boom, now I'm a Marxist. No, being a Marxist is about adjusting the way that you approach the world, the series of ideas that you have about how to analyze the world. It's an epistemological transformation. It's a transformation in the way that we come to approach the world. That, yes, has certain conclusions that have been reached, forms of knowledges that have been achieved and developed upon, but the center, the soul of Marxism is the worldview. And so there's a lot of people that just, they put the hammer and sickle and they're like, oh, that's it, I'm a Marxist. But when it comes down to understanding things like fascism, especially when there's so much information that's given to us by the bourgeois institutions on what fascism is, what it was, the forms that it took in Germany, the forms that it took in Italy, and various parts of the world. And this information is coming from bourgeois institutions that only want to dilute our capacity to understand the concrete concretely. And in this case, when the concrete object of study is fascism, what it's going to do is lead us to various forms of abstract and reified understandings and idealist understandings of what fascism is. And so we must hold steadfast to the only method that can help us understand the world in the dynamic processes in which it exists, that helps us understand things in the totalities in which they exist in and presuppose, in the interconnections that they're embedded in, and in the fact that things themselves and processes are not these homogeneous entities that do not allow for any internal plurality. That's all contradiction really is. You know, we had a good question here that I had forgotten to answer, and now I can roll back to, from Future Homestead. Can you explain what you mean when you say society is a contradiction? Yeah, it's very simple. That means that there are forces within society whose interests are in tension, in an antagonistic tension with another class. And so there's a conflict at play there. And the movement of society is nothing more than the reflection of the tension that exists and the struggle that takes place between these classes with opposite interests. In other words, society is what? A unity of opposites, a contradiction. Contradiction is another way of speaking about the law of the unity and struggle of opposites. They're the same thing. So, yeah, let's keep reading some of these crimes that Biden has done. Shout out to the PSL, by the way, for putting this thread up. Israel could not exist without the backing and financial support of the U.S. That's absolutely right. At least 68% of the people in the U.S. favor a ceasefire, yet Biden continues to press Congress for $14+ billion to send to Israel's war on Palestine. And an even greater percentage of Democrats, which is obviously the party of Biden, support ceasefire. So there's no democratic accountability. None at all. This is why even studies from bourgeois institutions show that talking about the U.S. as a democracy is a sign of lunacy. It is statistically confirmable. This isn't just, Marxist mumbo jumbo. It is empirically and has been statistically confirmed that if all of the people want something to happen and the elite don't, it won't happen. And if none of the people want something to happen but the elite do, it will happen. The only will of a group that expresses some form of correlation with the policy outcomes of the American state is the will of the elites, of the big monopoly capitalist class. What does that tell you about the system that we have, the political system that we have? Can it be called a democracy? Well, maybe a bourgeois democracy, which doesn't, even calling it that, I know that's a technical term in our Leninist tradition, but even calling it that is just absurd, because democracy means power of the common people. Demos, common people, kratos, rule. It's common people who are in power. There's no possibility of having democracy outside of socialism. Socialism is the only real form of democracy that could ever exist. And in actualizing itself, it dissolves democracy itself, because the only reason why you would need the people to be in full power so that they can exert some form of power over an antagonistic class that acts in the interest that is not of the people, that in acting in its own interest is acting against the people. And so democracy is realizing democracy in that etymological sense of the common people in power is the basis really of the dictatorship of the proletariat. A synonym for the dictatorship of the proletariat, the people, proletariat, the vast majority of society, having the ability to dictate his will, is another way of speaking about democracy. It's conceptually the same thing with different terms. But yet these monsters, these imperialists, have somehow convinced humanity that what they have is democracy. They go around the world looting, expropriating, super exploiting, bombing, killing, assassinating in the name of something that they don't have, which is democracy and human rights. Where are the human rights for us here? Even the very basic bourgeois rights that we were supposedly guaranteed in the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, a gift that was given to us by the anti-federalists who felt that the Constitution was a purely aristocratic document, an elitist, anti-people document. Even those first 10 amendments that are supposed to secure certain individual rights are not secured. How can something be a right when, as soon as it becomes an inconvenience for the elite, it's stripped from you? Where was the right of free speech and the right of media for Julian Assange, or for Edward Snowden, or for Mint Press News, or the Midwestern Marx Institute? Where is the right of the people that get censored, attacked, repressed, jailed, killed for speaking the truth? Even if they weren't speaking the truth, for just speaking. Where's their right to free speech? Where's the right of the people to read freely whatever they want? Which is a right that should be conjoined with the right to free speech. Where's the right of assemblage for the people that have been arrested for peacefully protesting against the genocide? So it's just pure bourgeois hypocrisy. We go around the world plundering in the name of the two things that we don't have: democracy and human rights. We don't have any of the social rights that are supposed to be guaranteed by every nation according to various to the UN Charter on social rights. We don't have any of those. We don't have the right to housing, food, an adequate, well-paying job, healthcare, education. We don't have any of those rights. But even the bourgeois individual rights that we claim to uphold, we don't even have those. But let's keep this going. The second one, the rise in mass incarceration is directly tied to Jim Crow Joe, the notoriously racist, who passed the notoriously racist 1994 crime bill. The bill resulted in harsher sentences, more prisons, and more violent policing. Today, the U.S. incarcerates more people disproportionately black than any other nation on the planet. We have 5% of the global population and 25% of the prison population. That's absurd. And then people have the fucking audacity to talk about Soviet gulags. The fucking audacity to talk about Soviet gulags. A country that had just been invaded by half of the fucking world, by all of the key imperialist powers, that had hundreds of thousands of spies from the imperialist powers there trying to sabotage the revolution, trying to choke the revolutionary baby in its incubator, that had parts of the old cadre trying to overthrow the ruling democratically elected government in order to serve their purity fetish ends for what socialism had to actually look like. It had all of these pressures. And in those pressures, you have phenomenons like the gulags, or the killing of various people who were being treasonous by acting against the interests of the state. How do we, in the context of 2023, having a quarter of the world's prison population and only 4% of the global population, have the audacity to look back at a society that had just come out of the brutal czarist regime and condemn it? it's just ludicrous when you contextualize it in that. It's ludicrous to think that people walk around talking about fear of Soviet gulags if you are a socialist when we live in this society. So, but number 3, Joe Biden voted in favor of the blood-soaked 2003 invasion of Iraq, and even proposed the colonial-style partition of the country as a means of quelling the resistance to U.S. occupation. More than 1 million Iraqis have died as a result, and many more millions have been displaced. Biden's political career has been marked by numerous attempts to cut spending on social programs. Oh, but I thought the Democrats were the guys that were friendly to social programs, according to the lesser of two evil logicians, such as Social Security, that millions of working class people in the U.S. need to survive. Working people's tax dollars should be used for more social supports, not for war. Absolutely. 5, Joe Biden was a key backer of the 2005 anti-worker, pro-corporate bankruptcy bill that greatly strengthened the hand of creditors at the expense of borrowers. We have this bill to thank for the fact that student loan debt can't be wiped out in a bankruptcy. So there you go. Happy birthday, Joe Biden. You are scum. You have been a cancer for humanity, and there's nothing special about you. All you are is a personified agent of capital. And capital, the way that it functions in societies where it is in control, is the greatest enemy of humanity. It is a cancer on humanity that destroys any human potential and favors only the crafty, opportunist vampires like yourself, who care only about personal gain and not social and common good. So those are, I think, the stories that we had planned for today. Holy shit. I look away for a second to read the 5 points, and there's 3 million comments. Is Eddie Dunn complimenting Reagan? Can I turn the volume up? It's tough, man. It's tough, but and Anna Kasparian, who of course we have a few disagreements with. She did something a few weeks back that we had reacted to, where she compared Biden to Bush and showed how even Bush exerted more pressure on Israel for events that were leading to less deaths, way a fraction of the deaths than the ones that are going on now. U.S. imperialism has declined and become more concerned, more cornered than it was 40 years ago. The mask has come off, absolutely. And that's when empires are the most dangerous, when they're in decline. Ability, I don't see what the... from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. There you go. I had it backwards. Let's see. Majority of online communists are angry liberals and embrace rat aesthetics. Yeah, what I describe in my book is just that for a lot of people, communism, Marxism, socialism just ends up being a personal identity. And what happens when one day your identity is being this sort of countercultural political figure within capitalism? Is it really in the interest of your identity, for the people that value their identities as the centerpiece of their life? Is it really in the interest of that identity for socialism to actually succeed? Well, I think the answer is no. The success of socialism would mean for a lot of these people the destruction of their countercultural identity of being socialist within capitalism. So I don't think this is the conscious thought process of a lot of people, but part of false consciousness is the fact that people operate consciously, but that there are a wide variety of forces produced materially by the society that we exist in, which make those conscious operations not so conscious. The forms of consciousness that are taken are distorted inversions of the way that the actual world is. They're forms of false consciousness, which I think the term that we've used could be a whole lot better, because people hear the term false consciousness and they think it's a problem of like epistemic hygiene. If only the way we viewed the world was better, we wouldn't have false consciousness. But false consciousness, it's as much an epistemic operation, a way of how we view the world, a problem of consciousness, as it is a problem of social existence, of the objective conditions that exist in the capitalist mode of life. What we have at play in the phenomenon of false consciousness, which is the dominant form, or one of the form ideology takes under capitalism, is a social necessity for the things going on in society to be misunderstood. The error then is not in thinking, it's not rooted in the epistemological level, the way we understand the world. It's the world itself that reflects itself in such a form that requires the people that exist in that society to misunderstand it. And that's a much more complex analysis than just the sort of dualism that a lot of people put forward of just image and reality. It's an analysis of how is it the case that the reality, why is it that the reality requires such a distorted image of itself? And what role does that distorted reflection of itself play in sustaining and reproducing the existing state of affairs, both the image and the reality? Let's see. Yale concluded, the study from Benjamin Page and I forget what the other guy's name is, two political scientists. It was published by a Yale journal. I don't think it was specifically like a Yale study, but it was published by a Yale, unless there's another one that that I'm not familiar with. Let's see. Yeah, Eugene Debs, along with a whole host of other people, a lot of people that were kicked out of the country, where they had to flee to escape persecution. That's where the Espionage Act comes out of, and they're using that act now to charge Assange and a few others. Let's see here. Oh, the Liger is here. Nice. I can't wait till Eddie's till Eddie wins the Olympics so that he can come back to to doing streams consistently. That's what I'm waiting for. But the last thing I wanted to talk about was a quote that I wanted to read and sort of break down from Michael Parenti's Inventing Reality. Yeah, Eddie, feel free to tag in. I know you're probably pretty tired, but feel free to tag in if you're interested. He says, if the press cannot mold our every opinion, it can frame the perceptual reality around which our opinions take shape. So notice how they speak about Palestine and how it is that the discussion is shaped when you talk about it in terms of an Israeli-Hamas war. The term war is problematic. A war implies two countries with different armies or two forces with different armies going at it. Palestine doesn't have a formal army. It has liberation forces. It doesn't even have an airport. It's so asymmetrical. So we see already there how, as Parenti is saying, they shape how we perceive a specific conflict. And in so doing, they set the parameters, they limit how we can think about these conflicts. Here may lie the most important effect of the news media. They set the issue agenda for the rest of us, choosing what to emphasize and what to ignore or suppress, in effect, organizing much of our political world for us. The media may not always be able to tell us what to think, but they are strikingly successful in telling us what to think about. It's been shown in studies after studies from the time of Parenti's Inventing Reality to now that the patterns of concerns that people have with certain issues are directly correlated to the amount of media time that they receive, whether in the form of articles for print media or in the form of television time with television screen media. What does that mean? That there's a direct correlation with whatever the media hysteria is at a given time, and what the concern of a certain select group of people becomes, what their concern is at that time. So this is extremely limiting. And it's the same thing, not just with general stories, but with candidates. Sure, they might have someone like Cornel West on for an interview every blue moon in a mainstream media outlet. But how often, when they're talking about politics and U.S. elections, how often are they bringing up the campaigns of Cornel West or Claudia de la Cruz or now Dr. Jill Stein? How much airtime is it getting? And when we see that airtime gets reflected in concerns of people, they have the complete control over how we think, the limitations of what we think is possible politically. So it's another higher level of coercion. It's a way of obtaining coercion through a form of pseudo consent. We feel like we're consenting. When we have these thoughts, we're conscious of ourselves having these thoughts. What we're not conscious of is the operation that's behind it. That's where ideology comes in. The series of manipulations and preconditions that were in place that allowed us to have these thoughts, the assumptions. Assumptions are another way of talking about unknown knowns. There are things that we operate we operate through the world as if we know, but we don't know that we know them. And we don't know how it is that we know them, how it is that these forms of so-called knowledges have entered the way that we come to approach the world. Those are what assumptions are. And they shape how we interpret the world. So when the media plays this limiting role of setting the parameters for what is possible, what issues can we be concerned with, what issues are out of sight, out of mind, they're effectively controlling the way we think in a way that is much more insidious, because most of the time we're not even conscious about the fact that this is going on. We think we're thinking freely, but in actuality, what we are is an individualized manifestation of these social forces of coercion through consent that are done in order to legitimize and reproduce the dominant state of affairs. Parenti continues, along with other social, cultural, and educational agencies, the media teach us tunnel vision, conditioning us to perceive the problems of society as isolated particulars. That's the bourgeois mode of thought. Separate the thing from everything else that it exists in. Remove it from the series of interconnections and the social totalities it is embedded in. This is very convenient for them, especially at the level of politics, because you need a systematic analysis to understand the particular difficulties that we face as working people, to not just understand it, but also to critique it and to understand how it is that we ought to change it, how it is that we can change it. If you can't have a systematic analysis because your whole modus operandi when it comes to thinking is reifying, taking things out of their context and then focusing in on it, you're effectively left without any cognitive weapons for understanding your own position in society, for understanding society at large, and for changing. That's why it's essential to create what someone like Gramsci called hegemonic institutions of the working class, or of the subalterns, which is a fancy term. I don't use it often, but basically means the classes that have no relationship to any effective way of exerting the dominant form of hegemony. Subaltern is you can almost use it synonymously with the term the people. Create people's institutions like Midwestern Marx, like RBN, like the work that people like Danny Haiphong do, like the various parties. People's institutions that can present alternative ways of seeing the world, alternative ways of understanding events, to the vast majority of people. Okay. Conditioning us to perceive the problems of society as isolated particulars, thereby stunting our critical vision. Critical vision requires systematic analysis, seeing things in the totalities that they exist in the interconnections that they exist in the movement that they're constantly in, and in the contradictions that permeate all of this. Larger causalities are reduced to immediately distinct events. This whole genocide of the Palestinian people, it's reduced to what? Hamas in October 7th. While the linkages of wealth, power, and policy go unreported or buried under a congestion of surface impressions and personalities, there's nothing too essential and revealing that cannot be ignored by the American press, and nothing too trivial and superficial that cannot be accorded a protracted play. There it is. There's a literal genocide being ignored. While I'm sure that there's been no lack of attention played to the Kardashians and to any other celebrity that's there to, on the one side, entertain us, on the other side, distract us. But, folks, we were actually able to get through all of our stories for today. It's been a tremendously enjoyable stream. It's been great discussing with you all, reading your comments, talking with Noah. Thank you to all of you who were able to stay on for the last 2 hours and 40 minutes. Thank you to all of you who were able to donate or become members, as Sam did for 8 months. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Sean, who came in big time with the two $50 donations. Thank you, Cordy. Thank you for your great questions and insights. Oh, here we go. Thank you so much, Lukacs, for the $5 super chat to People's Institute. So these financial helps are incredibly, tremendously appreciated. Thank you so much, Lucas. All right, so with that, we'll get going. Thank you to all who stayed and watched, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.